On the surface, Rachel seemed like the perfect wife. Beautiful, intelligent, and endlessly charismatic, she had an uncanny ability to light up any room she walked into. Her husband, David, adored her. To him, their life was everything he'd ever dreamed of: a loving marriage, a beautiful home, and their 17-year-old daughter, Emma, whose future shone brighter than the stars. Emma was on the verge of securing a full scholarship to her dream college, an opportunity that could change their lives forever. But beneath the polished veneer of Rachel's life lurked secrets that would unravel everything. For months, Rachel had been leading a double life. It started innocently enough, a flirtatious exchange with a colleague at work. But soon, texts turned into late-night rendezvous, and Rachel found herself entangled in an affair she couldn't, or wouldn't, escape. David had begun to notice the cracks. Rachel's late nights at work, her sudden secrecy, and the tension that had seeped into their once loving home. But his devotion blinded him to the obvious. He chalked it up to stress, to the pressures of being a working wife and mother. Emma, on the other hand, wasn't so easily fooled. One fateful evening, Emma overheard a hushed phone call between her mother and her lover. The words were unmistakable, slicing through her like a blade. The mother she admired, the woman she thought she knew, was living a lie. Emma didn't confront Rachel immediately. Instead, she began quietly gathering evidence, unsure of what to do but determined to protect her father. What Emma discovered was far worse than she could have imagined. Rachel wasn't just cheating on David, she was planning to leave him. Her lover had promised her a life of luxury, far from the mundane existence she claimed to endure. She would take half of everything in the divorce, and as for Emma? Rachel planned to manipulate the situation to make sure David was left with nothing, not even custody of their daughter. Emma was devastated, but she wasn't helpless. She resolved to uncover the full extent of her mother's betrayal and, with her father, devise a plan to turn the tables. It would be a delicate operation, one requiring precision, secrecy, and above all, patience. In the shadows of their seemingly perfect home, Emma and David began preparing for the ultimate betrayal of their own, revenge. Emma and David began their investigation carefully. Trust was the cornerstone of their plan. They had only each other now, and any misstep could leave them vulnerable. For Emma, the betrayal had ignited a fire of determination. For David, the initial shock gave way to a simmering rage he barely kept contained. But above all, he felt heartbreak, not just for himself, but for Emma. She had discovered her mother's darkest secret when she should have been enjoying the excitement of her future. David initially resisted the idea of vengeance. He wanted to salvage what he could of his family, naively believing there might still be a way to fix things. But Emma had no such illusions. She showed him the texts she'd secretly forwarded to herself, the photos, and the dates that coincided with Rachel's fabricated business trips. With undeniable proof in front of him, David finally saw his wife for who she truly was. "You're sure about this, Emma?" he asked one evening after she'd laid out her plan. They sat at the kitchen table, a battle station now strewn with printed emails and financial records Emma had quietly pulled from Rachel's files. "I'm sure," Emma said, her voice steady. "She's not just hurting you, Dad. She's hurting us both. And if she gets what she wants, we lose everything." David didn't argue further. His daughter's determination convinced him that they had no choice but to fight back. But how? Emma had an idea. Rachel's affair was scandalous, sure, but it wasn't enough to ruin her in a divorce. They needed to uncover something more damning, something that would destroy Rachel's credibility and ensure David retained custody of Emma. To do that, they had to dig deeper. The first twist came almost by accident. Emma discovered that Rachel had been transferring large sums of money to an unknown account. At first, she thought it was tied to her mother's lover, but a little research revealed it was something far more sinister. Rachel had been siphoning money from David's business accounts, slowly but steadily, for over a year. David was floored. He'd trusted Rachel implicitly, never bothering to double-check her access to their finances. "I thought we were a team," he muttered bitterly, staring at the spreadsheets Emma had printed out. The betrayal now extended beyond infidelity. Rachel had been quietly dismantling his financial security, ensuring she'd walk away with a golden parachute while leaving him in ruin. The discovery was a turning point. Emma suggested they hire a private investigator to gather more evidence while they worked from within. David reluctantly agreed, though the cost would stretch their already thin finances. What they needed now wasn't just proof of Rachel's betrayal but leverage. Something that would force her into a corner. In the weeks that followed, the investigators' findings added new layers to the unfolding drama. Rachel wasn't just planning to leave David and run off with her lover. She had also been secretly influencing Emma's college prospects, discouraging applications to prestigious schools in favor of local ones that would keep her under Rachel's control. It was a calculated move to maintain power over her daughter, even after the divorce. Emma was livid. "She's not just ruining your life, Dad. She's trying to ruin mine, too." For David, this was the final straw. If Rachel thought she could manipulate and discard their daughter as easily as she had him, she had underestimated both of them. Their revenge would need to be as precise as it was devastating. They couldn't afford to act recklessly. But the storm they were building was coming, and Rachel wouldn't know what hit her. The evidence against Rachel began piling up, a damning arsenal that Emma and David meticulously curated. Every financial discrepancy, every text and call log, every suspicious action Rachel had taken, it was all documented. David, once hesitant, now fully embraced the plan. His anger had transformed into cold determination. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about protecting his daughter and reclaiming their dignity. The private investigator brought their first major breakthrough. Rachel's lover wasn't just some charming co-worker. He was married as well, and his wife, unsuspecting and blissfully ignorant, was an influential figure in the local community. If exposed, their affair could set off a scandal that would ripple far beyond Rachel and David's lives. David hesitated when he heard this. "I don't want to hurt someone who doesn't deserve it," he said. Emma, however, was more pragmatic. "Dad, this is chess, not checkers. Rachel is using every piece she has to destroy us. If we don't fight back, she wins." As they debated their next move, another twist emerged. The investigator uncovered emails from Rachel's work account revealing she had been falsifying expense reports. She wasn't just betraying her family, she was defrauding her employer. It was the kind of evidence that could cost her not only her job but her professional reputation. With this, they realized, Rachel wasn't just selfish, she was reckless, leaving a trail of destruction wherever she went. Emma, ever resourceful, suggested anonymously forwarding the incriminating emails to Rachel's boss. "If she loses her job before the divorce, she won't have the financial stability to fight us in court," Emma reasoned. David, while uneasy about the plan's ruthlessness, couldn't argue with its logic. But before acting, they agreed to hold off, waiting to see if the information could be leveraged for something even greater. Meanwhile, Emma began subtly sabotaging Rachel's attempts to control her college decisions. She reached out to her dream schools on her own, re-establishing contact with admissions counselors Rachel had pressured her into ghosting. At the same time, she started planting seeds of doubt in Rachel's mind, casually mentioning schools she had no interest in to mislead her mother. "Let her think she's still pulling the strings," Emma told David. "By the time she realizes the truth, it'll be too late." The plan escalated when Rachel's lover's wife entered the picture. Emma and David debated for days whether to involve her. The decision was made for them when Rachel's lover unexpectedly visited their home one afternoon, boldly walking into the lion's den. He came under the guise of dropping off work-related documents but lingered just long enough for Emma to catch a glimpse of the familiarity between him and Rachel. "I can't believe her audacity," Emma seethed after he left. She's not even trying to hide it anymore. David, usually composed, finally snapped. If they're flaunting it, then they've made their choice. Let's make ours. That evening, David made an anonymous call to Rachel's lover's wife, providing just enough detail to pique her curiosity without revealing his identity. He left her with a single, cryptic message: check your husband's phone. You deserve to know the truth. The fallout was swift. Within days, Rachel's lover was in the midst of his own personal implosion. His wife confronted him, and though he denied everything at first, the mounting evidence from David and Emma forced a confession. The once smooth operator was now scrambling to salvage his crumbling life. Rachel, unaware of David's involvement, chalked it up to bad luck and tried to console her lover while keeping her own plans on track. For David and Emma, it was a small but satisfying victory. The web was tightening around Rachel, and she didn't even know it yet. But the most critical pieces of the puzzle were still to come. The next step would require precision and cunning, for the time to strike was drawing near. With the lover's life in disarray, Rachel's confidence began to waver. She grew tense, snapping at David and Emma over trivial matters, while feigning calm as if everything was still under her control. But behind her facade, Rachel was unraveling. She spent hours on whispered phone calls and left the house at odd times, clearly trying to salvage what remained of her affair. Emma took this as an opportunity to strike the first blow. Using a fake email account, she forwarded the incriminating work emails about Rachel's falsified expense reports to her employer's anonymous tip line. Within days, Rachel was called into a surprise meeting with HR. Though she put up a brave front when she returned home, Emma noticed her mother's pale complexion and trembling hands. Rachel didn't share what had happened, but her growing paranoia became impossible to miss. The cracks widened further when Rachel's lover abruptly ended their relationship. His wife had discovered more than just his infidelity, she had uncovered financial improprieties of his own. Afraid of losing everything in a divorce, he decided Rachel was no longer worth the risk. His breakup text was curt and final, leaving Rachel devastated. Emma watched from the shadows as her mother paced the living room, phone in hand, attempting to call him over and over. Each call went straight to voicemail. By the end of the night, Rachel had resorted to throwing a wine glass against the wall, shattering it in frustration. Emma felt a pang of satisfaction. This was just the beginning. Rachel's professional troubles worsened when her employer suspended her pending further investigation. Rumors began swirling around the office, and the once confident Rachel now feared stepping outside her door, knowing her carefully curated reputation was crumbling. Still, she hadn't realized the full scope of what was happening. She remained focused on the divorce she thought she controlled, unaware that David and Emma were 2 steps ahead. David, meanwhile, had begun quietly consolidating his own position. With Emma's help, he froze the joint accounts Rachel had been skimming from and moved his business finances to a separate entity, ensuring she couldn't access them anymore. He also began gathering testimonies from close friends and family who had witnessed Rachel's erratic behavior. His attorney, a shrewd and seasoned divorce lawyer, assured him that their case was growing stronger by the day. But the most unexpected twist came when Emma stumbled across something buried deep in Rachel's personal laptop: correspondence with a real estate agent about an apartment Rachel planned to move into post-divorce. The address was near her lover's workplace, a detail that revealed Rachel had been planning this escape for months, even before Emma had discovered the affair. "That apartment's expensive," Emma remarked as she showed David the emails. "She clearly thought she'd have your money to pay for it." David clenched his fists. "She's not getting a dime." Emma's next move was as bold as it was risky. Using her mother's saved logins, she drafted an email from Rachel's account to the landlord of the apartment, saying she was no longer interested and would not be proceeding with the lease. It was a small, calculated blow, but it sent a clear message: Rachel wasn't in control anymore. By the end of the week, Rachel's carefully constructed world had begun to collapse. She had no lover, no steady job, and no financial security. But this was only the prelude. David and Emma knew they couldn't stop here. The next phase of their plan would need to hit Rachel where it hurt the most, her social standing and her ability to manipulate the legal system. The stage was set, and Rachel was walking straight into their trap, completely unaware. The storm brewing in Rachel's life finally erupted one evening during what started as a tense family dinner. Emma had been uncharacteristically quiet, watching her mother with a calm intensity that made Rachel visibly uncomfortable. David, too, sat stoic and unmoving, his eyes betraying none of the fury he kept tightly leashed. Rachel, however, had reached her breaking point. She slammed her fork down onto her plate, startling them both. "What is this?" she snapped, gesturing wildly around her. "The silent treatment? You're both acting like I'm some kind of monster. If you've got something to say, just say it." David, keeping his voice even, replied, "You're imagining things, Rachel. Why don't you tell us what's really bothering you?" Rachel scoffed, her face twisting with frustration. "What's bothering me? What's bothering me is this life. I'm done pretending everything is fine when it's not. I've been miserable for years, David. And frankly, I've outgrown you." Emma raised an eyebrow, her calm demeanor only stoking Rachel's anger further. "What does that even mean?" Emma asked coolly. Rachel turned to Emma, her expression softening momentarily. "It means, sweetie, that I deserve to be happy. Your father," she gestured at David with an air of disgust, "has held me back for too long. He's complacent, boring. He doesn't understand me anymore. And I'm done sacrificing my happiness." David's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, letting her rant. Rachel, emboldened by his lack of response, leaned forward and delivered the bombshell she'd been holding onto for months. "I'm leaving," she announced, her voice filled with cruel satisfaction. "I've found someone else, someone who knows how to treat a woman like me. He's successful, ambitious, and," she smirked, her eyes narrowing on David. "He's everything you're not." Emma's composure finally cracked. "You're leaving Dad for some tall, rich guy," she snapped, her voice laced with disbelief. "Do you even hear yourself? What about me? What about this family?" Rachel's expression hardened. "You'll understand when you're older, Emma. Sometimes you have to put yourself first. As for your father," she turned back to David, her voice dripping with venom. "I've already talked to my lawyer. You'll be hearing from them soon." David finally spoke, his voice calm but laced with steel. "And what makes you think you'll walk away with everything? You think you can just waltz into some new life, leaving your family in ruins?" Rachel laughed, a sharp, hollow sound. "Oh, David. You're so naive. I've planned this for months. I know exactly what I'm entitled to, and trust me, you won't have much left by the time I'm done." Emma couldn't hold back any longer. "You're disgusting," she spat. "You're throwing away Dad, throwing away me, for what? Some fantasy? Some guy who's going to drop you the second you're inconvenient?" Rachel turned on her daughter, her face flushed with anger. "You have no idea what you're talking about. This isn't about you, Emma. This is about me finally living the life I deserve." David, now calm and resolute, stood up and pushed his chair back. "Rachel," he said evenly, "you've made your choice. Just don't be surprised when it doesn't turn out the way you think it will." Rachel rolled her eyes, brushing off his words. "I don't need your permission to be happy, David. You'll see soon enough. I'm better off without you." She stormed out of the room, leaving David and Emma in stunned silence. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Emma turned to her father, her voice steady despite the tears welling in her eyes. "Dad, we have to finish this. She's not just walking away from this unscathed. David nodded, his determination solidifying into something unbreakable. "We will, Emma. She doesn't know it yet, but she just declared war." Rachel's dramatic exit had left David and Emma shaken but resolute. The gloves were off now, and Rachel's arrogance had given them the clarity they needed to strike decisively. Her declaration of freedom was less of a threat and more of a gift, confirmation that her delusions of grandeur would blind her to the trap they were setting. The first phase of their plan was already in motion. Rachel's suspension at work, coupled with the fallout from her lover's failed affair, had left her vulnerable. Now it was time to escalate. David quietly filed for divorce, strategically timing the paperwork to coincide with the other legal troubles Rachel had unknowingly walked into. Emma, meanwhile, turned her attention to the college application Rachel had sabotaged. Knowing her mother had insisted on local schools to maintain control, Emma sent letters to admissions offices explaining the interference. She provided her grades, awards, and glowing recommendations from her teachers, evidence Rachel had tried to suppress. One school responded almost immediately with an acceptance and a partial scholarship offer. "You're going," David told her firmly when she shared the news. "Don't let her steal this from you." Emma nodded, her resolve firm. "She'll regret ever trying." The next move came when the private investigator delivered a bombshell revelation: Rachel's lover wasn't just a charming fraud. He had a criminal record for financial mismanagement, something Rachel had conveniently overlooked in her rush to secure a better life. This detail became the centerpiece of their legal strategy. David's lawyer, a tactical genius, prepared to use it to undermine Rachel's claims of financial dependency and moral standing in court. But David and Emma weren't done. They still had the emails proving Rachel's falsification of expense reports. Though they had been anonymously sent to Rachel's employer, the investigation was slow-moving, and Rachel had yet to face formal consequences. To accelerate her downfall, David's lawyer proposed a bold move, using the evidence to file a formal complaint with the company's board. It was risky, but if successful, it would not only solidify Rachel's unemployment but destroy her professional reputation. Rachel, oblivious to the storm gathering around her, continued her charade. She spent evenings loudly talking to her new man on the phone, flaunting her supposed happiness. Emma secretly recorded these conversations, noting every inconsistency in detail that revealed the cracks in Rachel's carefully crafted story. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when Rachel received a call from her landlord. The apartment she had been planning to move into was no longer available. She erupted in anger, smashing her phone onto the counter in front of David and Emma. "What the hell did you do?" she screamed, her eyes blazing with fury. David feigned confusion. "I don't know what you're talking about, Rachel. But maybe this is a sign. Maybe you should rethink everything before it's too late." Rachel's laughter was cold and sharp. "Too late? David, it's already too late for you. Do you know how much I'm going to take from you? Half your business, the house, even custody of Emma if I want it. You think you're clever, but you're just pathetic." Emma stepped forward, her voice cold. "And you think you're untouchable. But guess what, Mom? You're not as smart as you think you are." Rachel glared at her daughter, caught off guard by the defiance in Emma's voice. But before she could respond, Emma walked away, leaving Rachel to stew in her own fury. David and Emma exchanged a glance. "It's time," David said. Emma nodded. "Let's finish this." The trap was fully set. Over the coming weeks, Rachel's world would collapse piece by piece, each blow perfectly timed to leave her with no escape. She had underestimated the people she had tried to destroy, and now, her reckoning was at hand. The fallout started slowly, like a rumble before an earthquake. Rachel's suspension at work escalated into a full-blown investigation. The anonymous complaint David's lawyer had filed with her company's board included irrefutable evidence of her falsified expense reports. It wasn't long before she was called into another meeting. This time, Rachel left the office with a box of her belongings and a termination letter in hand. At home, her fury was volcanic. "Do you have any idea what I'm dealing with?" she shouted at David, her voice echoing through the house. "I gave that company everything, and this is how they repay me?" David, leaning against the kitchen counter with a cup of coffee, looked at her with mock sympathy. "Sounds rough, Rachel. Maybe you should take some time to reflect." Rachel glared at him, sensing something in his tone but unable to put her finger on it. She stormed upstairs, slamming the door behind her. David exchanged a knowing look with Emma, who was seated at the dining table, calmly working on her college applications. "She's unraveling," Emma said, her tone detached. "It's only going to get worse." And it did. The first major shock came during a routine meeting with her divorce lawyer. Rachel had gone in expecting to discuss strategies for taking half of David's assets and securing a comfortable alimony arrangement. Instead, she was blindsided by the revelation of David's financial restructuring. "He's moved the business under a separate entity," the lawyer explained, flipping through the documents with a frown. "Legally, it's not considered marital property anymore. There's nothing to claim." Rachel's face turned pale. "That's impossible. He can't just hide his assets like that." "It's not hiding," the lawyer replied curtly. "It's legal, and it's smart. If you want to challenge it, you'll need substantial evidence that he made the move in bad faith." Rachel's attempts to maintain control continued to backfire. Her demand for custody of Emma was met with fierce resistance, backed by a mountain of evidence David and Emma had carefully prepared. Texts, emails, and recordings painted a vivid picture of Rachel's manipulative behavior and lack of concern for Emma's well-being. Her own words, arrogant, dismissive, and cruel, became the nails in her coffin. But the most devastating blow came when Rachel's lover re-entered the picture, not as her savior, but as a liability. The legal troubles his wife had uncovered had grown, and he was now facing criminal charges for embezzlement. David's lawyer wasted no time ensuring the court knew Rachel had been closely associated with him. While no direct evidence tied her to his crimes, the mere implication cast a shadow over her character that the judge couldn't ignore. Rachel, once so confident she could control every aspect of her life, found herself cornered. Her job was gone, her lover was disgraced, and her legal battle with David was spiraling out of her control. She spent sleepless nights pacing the house, muttering to herself and obsessively checking her phone for messages that never came. Emma, watching her mother's descent, felt a mix of satisfaction and sadness. "She did this to herself," Emma told David one evening. "But it's still hard to see her like this." David put a hand on Emma's shoulder. "I know. But this isn't just about us anymore. She's a danger to herself and everyone around her. What we're doing is protecting our future." The final stage of their plan loomed closer. With each passing day, Rachel's life crumbled further, and the trap David and Emma had set tightened its grip. The reckoning had only just begun, and Rachel had no idea how much more she stood to lose. Rachel's desperation was palpable. Her once flawless appearance became disheveled, her carefully curated confidence replaced by frantic calls to lawyers, old friends, and anyone who might still listen. The polished, commanding woman who had once held the family in her grip was now a shadow of herself. Her biggest shock came during a court hearing that was supposed to be routine. Rachel had been banking on her usual charm and the appearance of stability to sway the judge in her favor. But David's lawyer, armed with every piece of evidence Rachel had naively left in her wake, painted a damning picture of a manipulative and selfish woman who had jeopardized her own family for personal gain. Emails revealed Rachel's financial deceit, not just at work but in her personal life, showing a clear pattern of mismanagement and dishonesty. Recordings of her conversations with her lover showcased her cruel intentions toward David and her indifference to Emma's future. But the coup de grace came when the court was presented with proof of her involvement in steering Emma's college decisions, an act the judge described as blatant emotional and psychological manipulation. Rachel was blindsided. "That's not true," she shouted in the courtroom, standing abruptly as the judge reviewed the evidence. Her lawyer's attempts to calm her only made her look more unhinged. "Mrs. Carter," the judge said sharply, addressing her by her married name with pointed emphasis, "sit down, or I will hold you in contempt." Rachel sank back into her seat, her face flushed with humiliation. The ruling that followed was brutal. Custody of Emma was awarded solely to David, with Rachel granted only supervised visitation rights. Her financial claims were reduced to the bare minimum, barely enough to sustain her now crumbling lifestyle. David's business was declared off-limits, and Rachel was held liable for a portion of the legal fees, further depleting her dwindling resources. But the final blow came after the hearing. Outside the courthouse, Rachel was approached by a reporter. News of her former lover's criminal charges had leaked, and her connection to him made her an object of public curiosity. "Ms. Carter, can you comment on your relationship with Mr. Bradley?" the reporter asked, shoving a microphone in her face. Rachel froze, realizing how quickly her personal drama had become public fodder. Cameras flashed, and questions flew at her, each one more damning than the last. She pushed past the reporters, her breath shallow, her carefully constructed world collapsing in front of everyone. At home, Rachel lashed out at David and Emma, her fury uncontainable. "This is your fault," she screamed at David. "You've ruined me." David remained calm, his voice low and steady. "No, Rachel. You ruined yourself. You lied, you cheated, and you manipulated everyone around you. This is the result of your choices." Rachel turned on Emma next, tears streaming down her face. "How could you do this to me? I'm your mother." Emma, her voice cold but steady, replied, "You stopped being my mother the moment you decided your happiness was more important than this family." Rachel stared at them, realizing there was nothing left to say. She stormed upstairs, slamming the door to what was once her sanctuary. But the echo of the slam was hollow, a final reminder that the life she had destroyed was one she would never regain. Meanwhile, David and Emma sat together in the living room, exhausted but relieved. "It's almost over," David said softly. Emma nodded. "Almost." They both knew the hardest part of their journey was behind them, but one more move remained to ensure Rachel couldn't recover enough to hurt them again. Their final act would be decisive, ensuring Rachel's descent into irrelevance was complete. Rachel's retreat into herself became all-consuming. She rarely left her room, only emerging to pace the house in fits of rage or desperation. The once commanding woman who had dominated David and Emma's lives was now a fractured shell, scrambling for any semblance of control. But David and Emma were not finished. They knew Rachel's manipulative nature and were determined to ensure she couldn't rise from the ruins she had created. David's lawyer proposed a final move, leveraging Rachel's former employer. The company had completed their investigation into her falsified expense reports, and the fallout was devastating. She was barred from ever working in her industry again and faced potential civil litigation for damages. But before the company took action, David's lawyer made an offer. If Rachel signed away all claims to David's assets and agreed to an amicable divorce with no further appeals, he would ensure the company settled quietly, avoiding a lawsuit that would destroy her entirely. The offer was presented to Rachel during a meeting with her lawyer. When she saw the terms, her face turned ashen. "You can't be serious," she said, her voice trembling. "He can't just take everything." Her lawyer, clearly weary of her antics, sighed. "Rachel, if you fight this, you'll lose. I've seen the evidence. It's airtight. If this goes to court, you'll walk away with nothing, and you'll face litigation from your former employer. This deal is the best you're going to get." Rachel stared at the papers, her hands shaking. She signed them reluctantly, each stroke of the pen feeling like another piece of her identity slipping away. As she handed the signed documents back, she glared at David. "I hope this makes you happy," she spat. David's reply was calm but cutting. "Happiness has nothing to do with this. You made your choices. Now you live with them." Meanwhile, Emma had her own way of sealing the chapter. She sent a final email to her top-choice university, attaching a heartfelt letter explaining her situation and her determination to move forward. Within days, she received a full acceptance, with a scholarship that would cover nearly all her expenses. She showed the letter to David, her face glowing with pride. "She can't touch me now," Emma said, her voice filled with relief. As Rachel's legal and financial troubles mounted, her social world crumbled as well. The friends who had once admired her charm and charisma turned their backs on her, unwilling to associate with the scandal now attached to her name. Her lover, who was facing his own legal reckoning, had completely abandoned her. The lavish life she had envisioned with him was nothing more than a bitter memory. One evening, Rachel finally confronted David and Emma in a rare moment of vulnerability. She stood in the doorway of the living room, her face hollow and her voice barely above a whisper. "I lost everything," she said. "Don't you feel anything? Pity? Regret?" David looked at her for a long moment. "I feel sorry for the person you used to be," he said. "But the person standing here now? She brought this on herself." Rachel turned to Emma, her eyes pleading. "Emma, I'm still your mother. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" Emma met her gaze, her voice steady. "You stopped being my mother the moment you decided you were more important than us. I'll never forget that." Rachel said nothing more. She disappeared back into her room, the weight of her choices settling on her like a shroud. David and Emma sat together in the living room, the quiet between them filled with the unspoken relief that the battle was finally over. But there was one last chapter to write, and it would be the one that closed the book on Rachel's reign of destruction forever. Rachel's departure came with none of the fanfare she had imagined for herself. After losing the court battle, her job, her lover, and her reputation, she packed her belongings into a few suitcases and moved out of the house she had once called her kingdom. The reality of her situation had become impossible to deny. She was utterly alone. The move was quiet and unceremonious. No neighbors came to see her off. No friends helped her load the boxes. She climbed into an old sedan, one of the few assets she had left, and drove away without looking back. For David and Emma, her departure was bittersweet. The house felt lighter, freer, without Rachel's presence. But the scars she had left behind wouldn't heal overnight. David focused on rebuilding his life, throwing himself into his business and therapy sessions that helped him process years of manipulation and betrayal. He promised himself he would never let someone like Rachel hold that kind of power over him again. Emma, too, found solace in moving forward. Her acceptance to her dream school marked the beginning of a new chapter. On the day she left for college, David stood in the driveway, hugging her tightly. "You've been my rock through all of this," he told her. "You're going to do incredible things." Emma smiled, her confidence shining through. "You too, Dad. We're better off without her." Rachel, meanwhile, struggled to find her footing. Her new life was a far cry from the glamorous existence she had envisioned. The small apartment she rented was miles from the upscale neighborhood she once flaunted. Job applications were met with polite rejections, and her tarnished reputation left her isolated from the social circles she had once ruled. She made a few attempts to reconnect with Emma, sending texts and leaving voicemails that ranged from pleading to accusatory. But Emma never responded. For her, Rachel was a chapter of her life she had closed for good. One day, Rachel attended a small community networking event in the hope of finding work. As she mingled awkwardly with strangers, she caught sight of David across the room. He was there for business, looking confident and happy. The sight of him laughing with a group of colleagues was like a punch to the gut. He had moved on, rebuilt himself, and thrived in the aftermath of her betrayal. For a fleeting moment, Rachel considered approaching him, perhaps to apologize, perhaps to lash out. But she quickly realized it wouldn't matter. She had no place in his life anymore. With her head down, she slipped out of the room, unnoticed. David, of course, had seen her. But he felt no anger, no satisfaction, and no pity. She was just a ghost now, a reminder of a life he had left behind. The months turned into years, and Rachel faded into obscurity. David and Emma, however, thrived. Emma graduated with honors, her future as bright as ever. David expanded his business, eventually finding love again with someone who treated him with the respect he deserved. Rachel's downfall became a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when selfishness and betrayal destroy the bonds that hold a family together. And while her absence left a void, it also gave David and Emma the space to grow, to heal, and to build a life free from her shadow. In the end, their revenge wasn't just about justice. It was about reclaiming their lives. And in that, they found something far more powerful than vengeance: peace. Bye-bye.